If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello and welcome to How Did This Not Get Made?
This is the podcast all about the movies you never saw, the scripts that were never filmed, and the ideas that never even made it to the page. My name is David Spencer.
And my name is Daniel Kaka.
And what are we talking about today, Dan?
We are talking about a little tabby cat, well, I guess little is relative, who is not fond of Mondays, but loves
ravioli.
Lasagna.
Sorry, that's for all the Fahuguapods listeners out there. We all know Garfield is the ravioli cat.
Yes. But we are talking about a Garfield movie.
Mm-hmm.
And you might be thinking, wait a minute, there was a Garfield movie, and
I've seen that movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think I had a nightmare like this once.
Supposedly, Bill Murray only did because he saw that the script was written by Joel Cohen and thought it was Joel Cohen of the Coen brothers, but it was somebody totally different.
Yes. Yeah, we are talking about a Garfield movie. I'm bringing up the email right now because this was actually a request from one of our listeners.
Yes.
And this was Ivy. You might know her as Miss Jukebox 8.
Yes, she's a big part of our Discord community. When we did our live Fahuguapods episode a couple of months ago, we did a giveaway, and I know she was one of the two names that were drawn for something, either the board game or the t-shirt. I don't remember which one. But yeah, she's been a big part of our community over there. It's really cool that you're listening to multiple shows on the Pipe Dream Network.
Mm-hmm. Now, I do have to admit something. And I thought I would save this until our email episode, but I think I should at least talk about it now. We had a request from Sam Arano.
Okay.
So he gave us a request, and it was all about the movie Against All Enemies. And that was originally what I was looking into. So Against All Enemies, if you don't know...
That definitely sounds like the title of a Garfield movie.
Yes. It was about the whistleblower who warned the Bush administration about 9/11.
Okay.
And the 9/11 attacks. And there was a screenplay that was put together by James Vanderbilt, and it just didn't get made. We've done this show for a while now, and we know that a lot of times, like, ideas will come up, they get pitched, and then they just get shut down, or something just, like, fizzles out. So, like, the Arlo Guthrie Lord of the Rings, great idea, but there's not really a story that's behind it. It's kind of just attached to that. And I started looking into Against All Enemies, and it really would have just been us talking about 9/11.
What a cheery episode.
And the thing is like, there's so many facts and things that were uncovered that's already out there about 9/11. You can even watch the trial. I think Richard Clark, I think his name is. But yeah, he had a Senate trial where he talked in great detail about this. But he wrote a book that was called Against All Enemies, in which was supposed to be turned into a movie. And the idea essentially just fizzled out. It would have been something that would have been interesting. But as far as like the production story, I didn't really see anything interesting beyond that. So
yeah,
we took it into consideration. I looked into it, and unfortunately, it just wasn't enough to warrant a full episode on it. So I just want to put that disclosure out now. And instead, we are covering a Garfield movie. Did I mention the title of this Garfield movie?
I don't think you have.
It was supposed to be Garfield Judgment Day.
Right.
Not in any way related to Terminator.
Or 9/11 for that
Or
matter.
9/11, no.
I'm sorry. I'm just now imagining us being the movie studio saying, I'm sorry, we're going to say no to this movie about somebody who worked in the U.S. government of the counterterrorism workforce and whistleblowing on government actions. And instead, we're going to make a movie about Garfield. That's what the kids want.
It is. Now, did you ever read Garfield comics as a kid?
Oh, sure. I mean, everybody read Garfield comics. But yeah, I remember reading Garfield. I remember as well, though, getting into in high school. Did you ever get into Garfield minus Garfield?
No, I did not.
Oh, have you never heard of this? Oh, Dan.
I've only heard of the Jaden Smith Garfield, where they took Jaden Smith's tweets and they put it into the bubble captions of Garfield.
Oh, that's so good. So Garfield minus Garfield, oh my goodness, I have not gone to this website in such a long time. The whole bit is they take Garfield comics and then they erase Garfield out of it.
Oh.
So it's just John talking to himself and being depressed.
Oh my God.
And it paints a very bleak picture of John's mental state
Oh, wow.
where he's just talking to no one.
This is pretty incredible. Wow.
This is one of those like fantastic internet things from back in the day. There's been like a whole bunch of other things like around Garfield minus Garfield as well. Like I think there was Garfield minus Garfield squared or something like that. Garfield's so easy to like just do weird things with. Describing these comics would mean absolutely nothing for audio. You're literally just saying, John says, I am not pathetic. And then he turns around and says, am I? And that's it.
I'm looking at one where it's just John is in the middle column and he's covered in tape and he just says, we're out of tape. Everything else is blank. I grew up reading the comics in the paper. In fact, when I was 13, 14 years old, I was a paper boy.
Oh.
Every day we would get one extra paper. And usually that paper is there for like, in case one gets really ripped up or damaged or like you're missing one, at least you have that extra one that's there. For most part, like the count was always correct, which means I always ended up with one extra paper. And one thing that I would do every single day while I was walking around is read the comics that were in there. And one of those comics that were in that was Garfield. I had also discovered that while I was in grade school, in our library, there was a comic section.
Yep.
And I would always gravitate towards them because like Calvin and Hobbes was there. And then like one of the other books was Garfield. And I just remember sitting there one day and just like flipping through, because you can go through comic strips so quickly. And I was just flipping through and just reading any and all Garfield that I could possibly consume.
Yeah, you know what? I think that was the same for me. I remember reading lots of Garfield in elementary school, and then I discovered Calvin and Hobbes, and I never looked at the orange cat again.
Yes.
Another thing I remember about Garfield, you know how Knott's Berry Farm has like the Peanuts characters to advertise them?
Yeah.
When I was a kid for a couple of summers, we lived in Washington State, on the east end of Washington State, right next to Idaho. And in Idaho, they had this really small theme park called Silverwood. They used Garfield characters to advertise Silverwood. Although I think Garfield gets used to advertise a bunch of different theme parks around the country.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure he tried to sell me insurance. It's not uncommon for that to happen.
He's one of those ubiquitous pieces of American pop culture, like Guy Fieri. Like, it's just inescapable.
So we can't really talk much about Garfield without talking about his creator, which was Jim Davis. Jim Davis, he was born on July 28th, 1945 in Marion, Indiana. He grew up on a small Black Angus cow farm with his parents Jim and Betty and his brother Dave.
I'm sorry, was his brother's name Dave Davis?
Yes.
Okay.
Dave Davis.
Okay, sure. Let's keep going.
I really hope he went by David Davis. So yeah, growing up, he was constantly around animals, but unfortunately, he was asthmatic and allergic to many of the animals, which meant he spent a lot of time inside. To keep Jim busy, his mother would encourage him to draw whenever he couldn't do or help out with any of the chores. In 1962, while he was attending Fairmount High School, he started submitting comics to the school newspaper, The Breeze, and eventually worked his way up to become the art editor. He also did 4 years of theater, in which he would eventually find a lot of the parallel between that and making a comic strip.
By virtue of being the cartoonist, I get to write the script, I get to set the stage, I get to determine the blocking, determine how everybody moves and acts with that. All I do is freeze frame them and draw them, in 3 frames.
In 1963, Jim attended Ball State. I remember in college when our football team would ever play Ball State, our chant to mess with the team would be like, "Ball is not a state." Ball. That just threw me off for a little bit, but yeah, he went there. For 3 years, he studied art education because that was the closest thing that he could get to learning art at the university. The program was meant to create art teachers, but when it came to actually teaching, Jim left the program and studied business in the hope of going into advertising and to work in some kind of art studio. There is where he really utilized his artistic abilities. At first, Jim figured he didn't need much of his business education, but turns out a lot of that knowledge eventually translated into his success, especially when it came to licensing and future business deals.
Definitely makes sense that this was a character created by a businessman.
Yeah. Yeah, which is why we see Garfield all over the place.
All
it makes
over the place.
Perfect sense. Just a few blocks from the university was Tom T.K. Ryan's studio, where he made the Tumbleweeds comic strip. Jim submitted his art to Ryan, and he was asked to be his assistant. Without hesitation, Jim took the offer and worked for TK beginning in 1969 and stayed with him for 9 years. A lot of his job was filler work. So he would make the borders, he would make bubbles, background, he would do the inking, and he would actually answer a lot of the fan mail that came in. While Jim was in college, he was just looking for a way to get paid to be an artist, thinking that making comic strips for a living was a long shot. But after working with TK, he started working on his own comics, now realizing that he could potentially get a comic into syndication. Jim was given his first opportunity when a syndicate executive told TK that they were looking for a comic that featured bugs, and Jim simply said that he could make a comic about bugs. He didn't really know much about them, but he's like, sure, bugs, I can draw bugs.
Why were they specifically looking for a comic about bugs? That seems so weird to be like when you're running a newspaper, as opposed to saying, okay, we need a new comic, let's go see, let's look at different artists and who's up and coming and stuff. They want to say, nah, we want a comic about bugs right here, and we'll just take whoever we can get.
My guess is one of the executives were just looking at their kid who was just fascinated by nature and bugs. And well,
I guess.
I mean, kids are into bugs. You don't really see many adults into bugs, but you see kids that are fascinated by worms and whatnot. And you're just perfect. Yeah. We'll make a comic strip, which is made for kids about bugs, which kids love. And thus, Norm Nat was born.
Wait, is it Gnorm the Gnat?
Yes. And ran from 1973 to 1975. Turns out the comic went nowhere because no one can relate to bugs. To end the short-lived comic strip, he had Norm crushed by a boot while holding a sign that read, "The end of the world is afoot."
And so I just had this Norm walking down the street. He's just in a great mood. And I had this big shoe come out of the sky and squash him flat. And that just ended the strip.
Jim started looking around for inspiration and what kind of comics most people were interested in. He noticed that dogs were predominantly featured, like Snoopy, Marmaduke, Fred Bassett, and Daisy. It was then that he noticed that there were no cats. Thus, Garfield was born. Jim drew inspiration from his time growing up on the farm, where he was surrounded by about 25 or up to 25 cats at a time.
That's a lot of cats.
Yeah. At that point, you just don't name them, you just number them. So, although Garfield is a tabby, Jim would draw inspiration from people he knew in his real life and then just apply them to Garfield, making him relatable as a human, but in a cat's body. Jim's thinking was that with dogs, they're predictable in their behavior, while cats are more reserved and easier to apply the thoughts of a human into that cat.
Makes sense.
To work all this out, Davis then checked himself into a room for 3 days at a Holiday Inn to really focus in on Garfield and really think of the plans of this. He began establishing what a human would want that also relates to cats. He boiled it down to 3 main areas. They need food, shelter, and love.
So he's locking himself in a hotel room for 3 days and trying to think about the ways humans could be like cats. It really seems like this is where the existential dread of John comes into play.
Yeah. This should be the movie right here. It's just like his 3 days locked in the room, which I'm sure he wasn't just locked in the room, but just like 3 days hunkering down, just driving himself crazy. Just comic strips all over the walls with like red yarn just connecting to each one of them.
Oh, man. See, what you do is you make the movie like that, and you make it like this really crazy drama, and only at the very end do you reveal that it's for Garfield. That's what he created.
Jim Davis then needs to be played by Bill Murray. Now, we needed to create an environment that would provide the opposite of that, creating conflict, because conflict or opposites usually lead to humor.
Mm-hmm.
He sees visual examples, especially when you look at like Warner Brother cartoons or the Muppets. You have a lot of opposites. You have short and tall, fat and skinny, smart and dumb, cat and dog. So now we have Odie in the picture as this happy-go-lucky, blank-minded dog. Garfield had a forceful personality and independent thoughtfulness. So when it came to his owner, John Arbuckle, he was a wishy-washy, easygoing optimist. Jim Davis admits that of all of the characters, he probably relates the most to John.
What did I tell you?
You know, John's lack of success with dating and stuff, you know, it was just those awkward moments and stuff like that. So I drew a lot of my own experiences for John. Absolutely.
Now seeing Garfield minus Garfield, like that became so much more bleak now. And knowing that it's so similar to Jim Davis, it's whew. Something that was obviously changed over the years has been the look of Garfield.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the old comics of Garfield, he's much bigger. He didn't have many stripes. And this has to do with Jim's attitude towards improving the character. So every few years, he would actually do a review with a bunch of his like artists, colleagues, to kind of rework Garfield and reimagine it. And like, what parts of this cartoons work? What doesn't work? Can we make him cuter in any way? And that's really kind of what it came down to, is like simplifying and making it cute. So that's why we have the Garfield look today. And if you ever look at like the old Garfield, it's like if you ever said that, hey, you did a side-by-side comparison and you told a kid like, this is the same cat, and they'd be like, nope, I don't believe you. So at first, the comic strip wasn't even called Garfield. From 1976 to early 1978, the strip was under the title John when it was published in the Peloton Times. When the comic was renamed Garfield, the strip was being published in 41 newspapers. Controversy struck, though, when Garfield, after a 30-day run, was dropped by the Chicago Sun-Times in October 2nd, 1978. They were looking for a new comic to fill the slot, and they figured that they wouldn't get much backlash, or if any, if they just dropped the newest comic, which was Garfield. And in fact, that did the exact opposite. An uncontrollable amount of letters were sent and calls were made to the editor demanding to bring Garfield back. So much so that this actually made the news.
Wow.
Yeah. Eventually, in October 16th, 14 days later, Garfield was back. This gave Garfield a lot of publicity, and now a lot of other newspapers want to get in on this.
Yeah.
And now today, Garfield is syndicated in over 2,580 papers. Jim was looking for a new way to expand his syndication, and he thought about publishing his work as a book. The problem was that comics at the time, they weren't really being put in books, and you would have to reformat the entire book.
Yeah.
Most of the time, they would actually have to be laid out vertically. It just doesn't have the same effect if you have to read a comic vertically than you do horizontally. Ballantine Books then approached Davis with a more horizontally formatted book and would better fit the format of the comics. In the publishing industry, this is actually now known as the Garfield format.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So many of his executives were against the idea because this meant that the books couldn't fit on the regular bookshelves, and the bookstore and retailers would have to create a different area to hold the books. This ended up working out for Jim and Garfield because that meant that these books would have to be put on display. They would have to go on the ends of bookshelves, so like in the display area of the bookshelves, and they were sold at registers. So because of this, This actually made the book a lot more visible.
It makes perfect sense. Not looking like the rest of the books there seems like a big benefit.
Yeah. And because of this, when it initially was published, it became the best-selling book in the nation because of that reason.
Wow.
So because of Garfield and wanting to publish it into books, that is why we have comic strip books like Calvin and Hobbes today.
Yeah.
In 1981, Jim established Paws Inc. Paws Inc? Paws Inc., yeah. In Albany, Indiana. The company employed artists, writers, musicians, and multiple licensing administrators to help syndicate the brand to not just newspapers, but like to toy manufacturers and anyone else that wanted to use Garfield's image in different products. At one point, Garfield was considered to be the most widely syndicated comic strip in the world. And instead of moving to a big city like Chicago or New York, Jim kept Paws Inc. in Indiana, even with the company making nearly $1 billion a year. Instead, Jim expanded and built the studio that would operate the entire company. When asked why, Jim would respond with something along the lines that as long as he had access to a mailbox, he could make Garfield from anywhere. For Jim, this was the best environment for him to work in because he was much closer to friends and family. And if you ever look at his studio, it's actually just like on a big plot of land. I think it used to be a farm out there.
Okay.
But this whole place is just surrounded by nature. And for him, like growing up on a farm, whenever he needs to escape, he just simply walks out of the office and then boom, he's already in the wood. So Garfield entered the world of television with their first television special, Here Comes Garfield, which premiered October 25th, 1982.
Well, he's a fat cat, a cool cat, nobody's fool cat, but look out, 'cause here comes Garfield. He never keeps fit, he's too hip, he likes his catnip, well, look out, 'cause here comes Garfield.
CBS found much success in their Peanut special, so they thought that this was a good move for them too. They ended up creating 12 animated specials during their run from 1982 to 1991, all written by Jim Davis. The first two specials were produced by Lee Mendelson Films, the same company that created the Peanuts. The rest were produced by Film Roman and aired on CBS.
Film Roman?
Film Roman is the name of the production company.
As in Gladiator? As in Garfieldiator?
Yes.
Someday I'll look back on this and laugh.
I've literally been waiting for this whole episode to be like, there's going to be a good opportunity for me to say Garfieldiator in here. And I'm going to find that opportunity and I'm going to jump on it. All right, continue. I'm sorry.
All I can see is that dance now.
Yep.
So all of these specials, they got an Emmy nomination and ended up winning 4 of them.
Wow.
The voice of Garfield was performed by Lorenzo Music. So in an ironic twist, in the animated show The Real Ghostbusters, Lorenzo voiced Bill Murray's character, Dr. Peter Venkman.
Hello, I'm Peter Venkman. Dr. Peter Venkman. I'm a scientist.
And now we know that Bill Murray famously voiced Garfield in the movies.
Hey, Rick, you know, did they use Bill Murray for this? Sounds a lot like Bill Murray. No, Morty, it's Lorenzo Music. In this reality, he's still alive. Oh, okay. Was his name Lorenzo Music? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. He also did the voice of that one guy from Ghostbusters, which is really strange because it's the same character Bill Murray played in the movie, but then when they made the movie, Bill Murray did the voice of Gazorpazorp, or Garfield, I mean. Yeah, that's pretty cool, Rick.
That whole Lorenzo Music, Bill Murray thing reminds me of another story. And so Michael J. Fox's middle name is Andrew. When he started getting into acting, when he went to register for SAG, he wanted to be under the name Michael Andrew Fox. But SAG rules are that if a name has already been registered to that, you can't use that as your credit name. No two actors can have the same credit name.
It's like Michael Douglas.
Yeah, exactly. Michael Keaton is actually Michael Douglas, but there was already a Michael Douglas when he joined SAG. But anyways, Michael J. Fox couldn't take Michael Andrew Fox because that was already in use by an actor from the 50s who was in a bunch of random TV stuff. He wasn't like a really big actor, but probably the most prominent thing he did was an episode of The Twilight Zone that aired in 1955 about a man who finds out that his neighbor is from the future.
Oh my God.
Michael Andrew Fox has been on both sides of that story.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Anyways.
CBS kept the momentum going and ordered a 13-episode season as part of their Saturday morning cartoon lineup. The first episode premiered September 17th, 1988.
Ladies and gentlemen, Garfield and Friends.
Friends are there
to help you get started, to give you a push on your way.
The show was a half-an-hour format. When season 2 was issued, they were given an hour-long slot. This meant that for the hour, they technically had 2 episodes that they would have to premiere for that week. The season ended up being 26 episodes, double from the first. The series aired until December 10th, 1994, with a total of 121 episodes.
Wow.
To help write the show, they hired writer Mark Evanier as the head writer for the show.
They hired Joel Cohen.
Yes. He actually helped with the Garfield television specials, and prior to that, he wrote for Richie Rich, Scooby-Doo, Welcome Back, Kotter, Mother Goose and Grimm, Pryor's Place, and The Love Boat. And then Jim would actually come in, and as far as like directing goes, they actually had a lot of the animation directors there. Mm-hmm. But the thing that he would really love to do is that he would sit in on the voice actors sessions.
Okay.
Because for him, like, he can hear these characters' voices in his head, so he's most familiar with it. So like when it came to his direction, he mostly stayed with the voice actors to make sure that that was all correct. Around the mid to late 80s, Jim Davis was looking to get Garfield on the big screen. Jim started working on a script, but since this was going to be a movie, the stakes needed to be higher, and the characters had to give the audience something that they had never seen before. The film was called Garfield's Judgment Day.
Oh, man. I did not even realize that this would be written by Jim Davis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, boy.
In the script, a beam of light startles Garfield and Odie along with the neighboring twin dogs, Al and Frito.
Why does it gotta be beams of light?
And the dog Barney, owned by the old man Ellie. They realize something really bad is going to happen soon. And now Garfield has to decide to break his animal oath to talk and warn John and other humans of the imminent doom.
There's an animal oath to not talk to people?
Yeah, just like how there is a toy oath to not talk to humans, and yet Woody broke that oath, and I'm not sure why he's not exiled and excommunicated out of the toy community. So a tornado touches down and begins destroying everything. Through the story, we follow Garfield, Odie, John, the neighborhood pets, and Arlene, which was a stray cat, which was introduced in this story, as they deal with the disaster surrounding them. Arlene eventually appeared later on in the television series, but this was actually supposed to be the first time we ever saw her, was supposed to be in this movie.
Gotcha.
Jim teamed up with the producer Lee Mendelson, who was the producer behind the Peanuts TV specials and Garfield's first 2 television specials. And he took the liberty to record the dialogue and the music for the film. Like, no one gave him the green light. He just recorded all of the stuff. He's like, I have access to all of this equipment.
And he did the music ahead of time?
Yeah.
So that reminds me of Tom Tykwer composes the music for all of his movies, and he composes the music before filming, which is this bonkers thing to do. You don't make the music to your movie until after you shoot it, but he likes to compose the soundtrack and then film the movie. Like, I guess, like, you know, composing the soundtrack helps him get into that space and then film the movie, which does make some kind of sense. But that's something with Cloud Atlas. Him and along with the Wachowski sisters directed Cloud Atlas. And so he wrote all the music for Cloud Atlas before they began filming.
Interesting.
Which I guess also makes sense for that film because you're dealing with so many genres and time, places, and like things going on that having a score like that to just kind of ground everything, to have kind of like in your head while shooting, especially when you have 3 different directors who are making it, it definitely does make sense to like create a more cohesive kind of feel to everything. But that's definitely not something I would expect out of the Garfield movie.
No. What I would love to see, what was his name? It was
Tom Tykwer.
Tom Tykwer. I would love to see him do a pitch for a movie, but he would go into like an executive meeting and he would take a boombox, set it on the table, hit play, and be like, "We open on a girl running." Jim had gone ahead and just recorded all of the dialogue for the movie. made the music, and he started pitching the film after doing so. He pitched it to predominantly 20th Century Fox and Disney, in which both of them declined the offer. They assumed the reason behind this is because of the subject matter. It was a lot darker than the comic strip was.
I'm sorry, you talk about it being darker, and now I'm imagining that this is the movie that's about 9/11.
Yes. Another reason for it was that the TV special Garfield, His 9 Lives, which came out in 1988, had gotten the lowest ratings out of all of the specials. So yeah, it seemed like a lot of people were kind of worn out in seeing Garfield, and maybe making a movie about this property is not the right time for it.
I mean, I don't know if you're about to go into this, but do we know why it was called Judgment Day? Was this after T2 Judgment Day came out? Is it supposed to be a reference to that?
So this is before Terminator came out in 91.
Oh!
And he was pitching this based on...
Oh, Terminator 2 was 91. Okay, yeah.
2 was Judgment Day. Terminator 1 was 1984. In my research, I couldn't really figure it out when exactly he was pitching this movie out there. But based on the context that Garfield, His 9 Lives, which came out in 1988 or premiered in 1988, I assume that it was going to be around that time is when he did so.
I didn't realize there was that big of a gap in time between Terminator and Terminator 2. Like, I heard Judgment Day, and I thought this was, like, a kind of intentionally goofy nod to T2.
Garfield, microchip identification number 3435BT-37C22. Guilty of many crimes, including shoplifting and...
That's definitely a big psycho robot.
I guess they were really trying to play this straight?
Yeah.
Weird.
I will say that Judgment Day is a bit odd, but also having a movie called Garfield End of Days is even more bleak than that.
It just sounds to me like Jim Davis is like, we got to make this darker, and the only way to do that is by stripping out any sense of humor that this comic might have had.
But like I said, it's a whole different story. Like the TV show, I remember watching the TV show as a kid, and it was very happy-go-lucky, and even the comic strips are just like silly and fun, but like to make a movie, you're just like more is at stake. To keep this project alive, he actually turned to CBS to make a 1-hour primetime special. CBS still declined. So in the last-ditch effort, Jim told them that if he cuts out the musical numbers, he can shave down the script to make it a 30-minute special.
Wait, I'm sorry. It was called Judgment Day and it had musical numbers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You know, you got to make Judgment Day fun and light.
What are you doing here, Jim?
So after he proposed the 30-minute special, CBS was like, well, no, we're not going to do this. What remains of the story is actually a book that Jim published in July of 1999, which is under the same name, Garfield's Judgment Day, which, from my understanding, follows the same story from the script. As for the music, I guess Jim was so optimistic about the film that he actually released a TV promo back in 1988 that played during the Happy Birthday Garfield special, which features Jim introducing Lou Rawls and Desiree Gautier and singing what I assume is a song called We Got It Good and It Ain't Bad.
Our first full-length feature film will be called Garfield's Judgment Day. One of the songs from the movie is about how easy cats and dogs have it.
No beds to make.
No bills to pay.
Yeah, every day's a holiday. We got it good, and that ain't bad.
The video features Lou and Desiree in the recording studio with Garfield and Odie rotoscoped in the clip as they're dancing along to the song. So it's really weird, like Jim Davis actually introduces them, so he was pretty optimistic that it was going to get made. Jim Davis thought that since this film was rejected for its dark tone, he would try and write and pitch a new script. The story was about Garfield, Odie, and John visiting John's parents' farm. The story would mainly focus on the chickens on said farm and the crazy lifestyles that they live.
There ain't nobody here but us chickens.
The tone was much lighter, and he thought that he could fix the issue that he had before. Unfortunately, again, no studios were interested, and Jim cut his losses. There was a supposed third script that was written, And I couldn't find any details about the plot of this one. But at this time, CBS was no longer making their Garfield television specials, and Garfield and Friends was nearing the end of its run. For the studios, they saw Garfield as past its prime. Now, when the live-action film came out nearly 10 years later in 2004, 20th Century Fox considered making the film after seeing the success of the live-action Scooby-Doo and Rocky and Bullwinkle. Mm-hmm. When they cast the film, the studio first wanted Jim Carrey to play John Arbuckle before Breckin Meyer. Before Bill Murray, Jack Nicholson was considered for the role of Garfield.
Never rub another man's rhubarb.
What? What?
Yeah, that would have been interesting.
I'm just stuck on this Jack Nicholson Garfield thing. That would have been so much better for Garfield Judgment Day than it would have been for Garfield the movie.
The story as to why, and I know you touched on this before, the story as to why Bill Murray agreed to do the role is because he was given the script and he noticed that it was written by Joel Coen. He assumed that it was the Joel Coen of the Coen brothers and blindly agreed to be part of the movie, not knowing that it's actually Joel Cohen with an H, who is the writer behind Toy Story, Cheaper by the Dozen, and Money Talks.
Oh, there must have been a couple of writers on Toy Story.
There were quite a few, yeah.
Yeah.
Murray recorded his dialogue in his New York City apartment and while on the set of The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou in Greece.
I'd like to imagine that he read the screenwriter name, didn't even read the script, and assumed it wasn't even about Garfield the cat and thought it was like, I guess they're making a comedy about presidents. Sure, I'll play Chester Garfield.
Either that or he read Garfield's Judgment Day a long time ago and they're like, ooh, they're going with this dark tone, and finally they got a good director behind it.
Or he read Garfield minus Garfield and it's like, I'm going to get paid to like not even be there and not say anything? This is the best job ever.
Now, something that I wish we could have seen, and maybe there's footage of it somewhere.
It's Garfield minus Garfield Judgment Day?
Yes. So Jim Davis nearly made a cameo in the live-action film as a drunk convention attendee.
Okay.
But it was actually cut out of the film in the end.
Not quite like a Stan Lee level cameo.
And I don't think many people really know what Jim Davis looks like to like really warrant that.
Boy, this is such a weird thing, and I would love to see Judgment Day just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess that's going to wrap up our episode today. Mm-hmm. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening. If you want to find more of this podcast, you can go find it at pipedreampodcasts.com, where you can also find our other podcasts like Come On Fahookwapods, The Weird Alphabet, and Escape from Vault Disney. We also have a Patreon page where you can donate money to help keep our feeds paid for, website costs paid for, and keep these shows going. For $2 a month, you get a special bonus monthly show called Pipe Dream Unclogged, where we talk about random nonsense. And for $5 a month, you get access to our notes, and there's other perks along with both of those as well. Go to our website to find the link to that. You can also find us on social media. We are at How Did This Not Get Made on Instagram. We are at HDTNGM on Twitter. And we would also love it if you would leave us some iTunes reviews. Those really help our podcast get found. Oh, and I should mention, I know I mentioned earlier, but once again, our email address is notgetmade@gmail.com. Send us suggestions for anything else that we should talk about, like Garfield Judgment Day. You know, it's really funny because I know Miss Jukebox probably put in that email a while ago. We were hanging out on Discord. Alexa and I were playing Rock Band on Discord with random people just watching a stream. And Miss Jukebox jumped into that and was talking about Garfield Judgment Day. She was like, yeah, did you guys get my email? I'm like, I don't know, probably. I don't remember, but Dan's certainly see it in it. But that sounds like an amazing movie, and we definitely need to make an episode out of it.
Yeah. I'm so glad that I went through this rather than having to relive through 9/11 again.
All right. Well, that's going to go ahead and wrap us up. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening.
All right. Thank you.
Live our lives like simple folk. Why fix a thing if